So, after uploading my new cinematic drone video of Madeira, you had a lot of questions. Which settings do I use on the Mini 4 Pro to achieve cinematic results? How do I color grade my clips? ND filters, D-Log-M picture profile, music and sound design, you name it. This video is the answer to all of those questions. I will be completely transparent about the exact settings I use on my drone, when and why I use different ones, and I will also show you how I edited this whole video together, including my color grading and sound design process. So welcome and thanks for all your inspiring feedback. I highly appreciate that. Now let's start cooking. There are a few essential settings which actually make all the difference. But first, let's rush through the basics. I always shoot in 4K 30 FPS, so I can slow it down to 80% on the 24 FPS timeline. Shutter speed is 1/60 obviously, ISO on 100, and the D-Log-M picture profile always stays activated. This is the secret sauce for beautiful colors and endless flexibility in the edit, as you will see later in this video. My white balance is mostly set to 5600 Kelvin to match daylight conditions. Only during sunsets or in darker, cooler environments I tweak the setting according to the conditions of the scenery. Exposure-wise, I always work with zebras, and I suggest you to keep your shots balanced at 0 or slightly underexposed. You can always get out a lot of slightly underexposed images, especially with the 10-bit footage of the Mini 4 Pro and the flat D-Log-M picture profile. But if you're overexposing, you're so watch out for that. If you don't get these settings right, you will have a hard time and your footage will look terrible. The max angular velocity or yaw speed. If you put this on high, you have very sensitive and harsh movement from left to right. I would leave it on about 30 degrees per second to get smooth results. Next up, the yaw smoothness. This indicates how fast the drone stops when letting go of the left stick. A low number means an abrupt ending. If you increase the yaw smoothness, it gradually fades out your stop motion. My recommendation would be to set it on 20 to 30 to achieve a good balance. The expo settings affect how much stick movement you need to put in versus how much movement you get on the drone itself. If you have these settings on low, you have flat curves and your drone won't start turning immediately as you move your left stick. Otherwise, the other extreme, if you have set it on high, your drone immediately catches the signal for movement, and even with tiny stick movements, your drone starts to react instantly. The gimbal max control speed. Very important setting for smooth videos. This affects how fast your gimbal is pitching up and down when turning the wheel on the backside. The lower the number, the better, otherwise it looks like your gimbal is broken, which is everything else but cinematic. I set it to about 15 degrees and that works fine for me and my style of flying. Please consider that all these settings work perfectly for me. Try it out for yourself and see if you need different ones. The tilt smoothness. If you push the gimbal wheel and release it, this setting will change how abrupt the tilt movement gets stopped. The higher it is, the more it smoothens it out as you release the finger off the wheel. My advice is to go out, start your drone, push these settings to its limits and play around to see what works best for you. Of course, you can use my settings as a starting point. I will now walk through a few clips where I blend in my exact settings, and I will also show you when and why I made some changes. In this scenario, I switched to sports mode since I wanted to turn off all the sensors to avoid any correction of the drone. I also bumped up my ISO to 400 since it was an overall darker condition. If I do shots like these, I always try to stay exactly behind my drone so that I have full control and sight about the path I'm flying. This way I can fly really close through or past objects, and I can always make sure if it's even possible or not. These are the types of shots where the most accidents happen, so be careful. In this shot I flew in normal mode and I had to bump up my shutter speed to 1/100 since I had my ND32 on my drone and it was still too bright. If you're flying over water, always check out for birds or seagulls. The mini drones are like food for them, and 3 of them were already chasing and attacking my drone. Here I changed my white balance to about 4000 Kelvin since it was early in the morning. Shutter was on 1/60, ISO on 200, and all of that with my ND16 on my drone. If you don't know exactly which white balance you should choose, you can switch to auto white balance for a second and then switch it back to manual. If you're still a little bit off, you can tweak your colors in the edit. The more precise you get it done while you're flying your drone, the more time you save afterwards. So this is what we are working with. There are 53 different clips in my timeline, covered by 65 sound effects, which are all sorted and highlighted with different colors to always stay organized. It might look overwhelming in the first place, but it's not really that complex. If you're getting better as a filmmaker, you might think that you have 1000 effects or adjustment layers going on your timeline. But in the end, it's the exact opposite. Sound design becomes more and more crucial, and you just have to stay organized with all the specific colors you choose for all the different sound effects. What I always like to do is to gradually fade my sounds in and out to achieve smooth transitions from the previous and into the following clips. In Premiere Pro, I just have to press P to create keyframes, and now I can easily adjust the loudness. Let's take this shot of the waterfall for example. Since I'm flying towards it, I gradually made the water sound louder and louder as I'm flying closer to the waterfall. This way I build tension and it matches the overall visual experience. Another way to fade your sounds in and out is to use the default transition by clicking right at the beginning or end of a video. If you have the latest version of Premiere Pro, there will already be a sign on your audio track and you just have to drag it to let them fade in and out. Speaking of smooth transitions, I also constantly made use of the J and L cut. Always play sounds before another clip starts to set a little bit of tension for the next clip, which is the J cut. The viewer gets curious if he sees a certain scene and all of a sudden he hears different sounds like the wind or crashing waves coming in. The same thing counts for the ending of a clip, which is the L cut. You don't want to hear an abrupt ending of a sound. This just won't feel right to the ears, and that's why you should also gradually fade them out and find the sweet spot to get a smooth transition. To sum it up, if you combine the gradual keyframes, the fading in and out transitions, and the J and L cut, you achieve really smooth transitions between your audio tracks. Let them play and flow all together, and trust me, this will make all the difference. Since I already have an entire and very detailed video on my channel, I won't go too deep into this. However, before you color grade your footage, you always have to color correct your videos properly. This is how it's done. I'm opening up my Lumetri color tab and the waveform tab. The flat D-Log-M picture profile is pretty compressed and has to be spreaded out to bring the shot to life. We can do that by increasing the whites and decreasing the blacks till we hit that range. After that, you can play around with your highlights and shadows to fine adjust your correction. Keep in mind that the highlights and shadows only affect the area above and beneath the midtone area. When you're done, push your contrast to spread it out even more and then play around with your white balance if needed. Now we hover to the curves and play around with the white one. Shape it like a S-curve and always keep an eye on the chart if it's still in your wanted 0 to 100 range. If you want to soften up the shadows to give it a cinematic touch, you can always lift the point on the left side a little bit. This was the color correction part. Now there are two ways to actually color grade your footage. When you are really lazy, you can simply download the DJI Mini for ProLUT from DJI's website, throw it onto your clips, and then you adjust its intensity to your likings. The second way is to do everything manually by yourself. Therefore, you open up the Hue versus Saturation tab and set keyframes to all the colors you want to increase or decrease in your shot. Like I said before, I already have a very detailed video on my channel. Check it out if you want to see more about the manual color grading.